Hi, everybody. This is Loren Baker of Search Engine Journal. Welcome to today's Search Engine Journal show. With me, I have Krista Seiden of KS Digital. Hey, Krista, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really well. Thanks so much for having me here.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited because really, the timeliness of this. We just got through July 2022. We're a year until July 2023, which is the time and the date that we're supposed to see the sunsetting of Google Universal Analytics, and then the forced transition or the planned transition into GA4. And Krista, we've done a couple shows on GA4, but what makes me incredibly excited is about your background working not only with Google but with analytics even before Google. So, if you wouldn't mind letting our audience know a little bit about yourself, your background on the Google side, and just what makes your passion for analytics tick.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the analytics industry for a very long time, 13 or 14 years, dating myself a bit there. Um, I started at Adobe prior to the Omniture acquisition, worked really closely with the Omniture team after acquired. I did in-house, practitioner level analytics at Adobe and then at the Apollo Group. And then I went to Google. And actually, my first couple of years at Google, I spent in-house doing analytics and optimization for the Google Cloud team, building out their analytics programs for their own websites. And then I moved to the Google Analytics team itself. So I spent about 5 years on the Google Analytics team. I was the evangelist for Google Analytics. So I went all over the world to teach, speak, train about Google Analytics. And the last 2 years I was there, in addition to the evangelist job, I took on a product management role and helped to build the beginnings of Google Analytics 4. So I'm very familiar with the tool, all of what went into kind of thinking through it and why and kind of where that direction was going. I built funnels and pathing in the new Explore section in GA4. So if you love those, awesome. If you hate them, you can tell Google I don't work there anymore. Um, but I left Google in 2019 and started my own consultancy, KS Digital, and I work with really large clients on helping them to think through their strategies for GA4, set up GA4, do all of that, as well as teach courses for Google Analytics for outside of my consulting work.
So, just as a reminder to our audience, if anyone's looking for information on GA4, Google Analytics 4, Krista worked and was a product manager on GA4 upon its launch for the first couple of years, correct? And you
Yep.
left in 2019. So, you are a wealth of information on GA4. You were leading the GA4 project, and now you've gone solo. You're no longer at Google, and you're consulting on GA4. So you're not a third party expert. You were in house. You were putting this together, and then now you're bringing it out, taking the lid off, so to speak. So it's really a pleasure to have you. What are some common misconceptions about GA4 that you've seen out there, especially with SEOs who tend to not like change very much, which is ironic given the field of SEO?
Isn't it though? Yeah, so I think many people may have looked at Google Analytics 4 or tried it out a year or 2 years ago, early on in its evolution. It's changed a lot since then. So I think some of the early feedback is it's missing a lot of features. It doesn't look like anything that I'm used to. All of these kind of things. Some of that's still true. It still looks pretty different. Some of that's intentional. Some of it, I really hope that they're going to correct. Like, please kill all of the scatter plots as soon as possible. But I think it's come a long way, especially in the last 6 months. I think leading up to the deprecation announcement, which they announced on March 16th of this year. So I think leading up to that, they were working on a lot of big launches, and a lot of things have come out kind of in the February to now timeframe. So we've seen a lot of things such as the landing page dimension, which I think SEOs were particularly upset about, didn't exist in GA4, couldn't build their landing page report. That exists now. Is it a default report yet? No. I'm hopeful and confident that they will add that in eventually. But you can build it yourself. And there's a lot of great tutorials out there online of people doing it, showing you how to do it. So I think, one of the misconceptions is that, this product just isn't there yet. And I would push back a little bit and say it's constantly evolving, and there has been a lot of new things that have come out. And you just have to take the time to actually, use the tool and understand what's actually there these days.
So it sounds like the information is there. It's just that you have to set it up. And does that add to more customization components of GA4? Or
Yeah.
because people are
Um,
used to like clicking on landing page and then getting that and just seeing whatever is there. So is there actually more customization
So
available?
yes, I think in general the answer is yes. There's a lot more customization in GA4, both optionally and maybe necessarily. So for the first time ever, Google Analytics has a editable navigation bar. You can change, add, delete reports that you need or you want for your organization. You've never been able to do this before in Google Analytics. It's been a huge feature request over the years, and something you could do in like Adobe Analytics or Omniture since mid 2000s. So it's nice that we now have this ability to actually customize the UI of GA4. We can choose what reports to show, or not show for people in our organizations. That does come with some additional setup costs though, right? If a report isn't there yet that you want, you have to build it and add it. So I think, there's pros and cons to this approach, but I love the ability to actually be able to change the user interface. For example, in one of my analytics accounts, I literally have a navigation element called Krista's Faves, and it's just a whole category of my favorite reports or my go-to reports. So I don't have to kind of click through a lot of different areas. I just have one list of things that I know I use often and can, easily go to. And I think that's, amazing. And I've seen a lot of companies start to take advantage of this. I have a client who has rolled this out across all of their properties, has, very line of business specific categories and reports built out. So I think it's really, really cool.
Are there any other hesitations that you're seeing clients have when making the transfer as well, besides the availability of the same besides the apples to apples comparison availability?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that it is a costly shift. It is not a lift and shift from Universal Analytics to GA4. It's a completely different data model. And to effectively create a Google Analytics 4 implementation, you need to take the time and effort to think through it. You need to say, how best can I utilize this new data schema? It's events and parameters, which is totally different, but opens up a lot of opportunity. And I think if you look at some of the bigger names in the analytics industry, they're really praising the new data model that exists. That being said, I think you'll find a lot of non-praising comments about some of the reports that do or don't exist, or the UI or things like that. But I think it's getting there. But I think it needs to be an intentional change. Don't just copy over your category action label events from Universal Analytics into GA4. You're going to have a terrible setup if you do it that way. So I would say, we just really need to think about it and do it intentionally so that you have a really good setup going forward and you can kind of future-proof yourself for the next decade of analytics.
Great. And when we were talking earlier before the show, you had mentioned how it's still maturing for people to be a little bit patient. So
Mhm.
is there anything that that you feel is going to be launched soon, and or anything we should pay attention to, anything that's been launched recently
Yes.
or added?
So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things that have been added recently. So I mentioned that landing page report. There's actually three brand new UTMs. So for decades, we've had 5 UTM parameters. If you're familiar with those, the campaign tracking things that you put on your URL so you can tell where people came from, right? Very, very helpful for any content that you're posting out there that you own or on social, that kind of thing. There's 3 brand new parameters. Google released them initially to be used kind of for auto tagging for Google Ads. There's one called source platform. There's one called, I want to say it's marketing creative and or creative format and something like that. There's 3. While they are auto tagged parameters, you could use these as your own, additional parameters. So 5 wasn't enough between, campaign, source, medium, content, and term. You've now got 3 more that you can use for any manual tagging initiatives. I think on top of that, content and term for UTMs were missing from the UI for a long time, for years now. And they have finally been added into the UI of GA4. So you can now pull all of your campaign parameters in and analyze by those. So I think those are great additions. Conversion rate just launched. Bounce rate is back, newly back in GA4, but let me caution you, this is not the same bounce rate as you have in Universal Analytics. It is absolutely not apples to apples. It is actually the inverse of the new metric in GA4 called engagement rate, which is looking at people who are in engaged sessions. So they've been on your site for more than 10 seconds, so they have more than one page view or more than one event on your site. So very, very different definition, a slightly better definition of bounce rate, but
much better.
I'm not a huge fan of bounce rate in general, so I tend not to look at something like that. But it is back for those who missed it dearly.
I am so happy. I am so happy that that's changing, because bounce rate is probably one of the biggest complaints you hear. Metrics that there are out there. It's completely dependent upon the way that events are set up on the page, right? Totally. So I've had people like change their events on the page and be like, and then like for some reason, not to complain, but for some reason, bounce rate's like one of those things that resonate on up the ladder, like C-suite. I'll have C-suite being, how come our bounce rate has changed? It's like,
totally.
What?
And you're just like, it doesn't matter. It's a stupid metric anyways.
It's an internal metric that you set up based upon what you want to see, right? So if I want to have a higher bounce rate or whatever, I can just do more events or less events, or whatever, however it matters. Like it's completely front end. Okay, so
totally.
I'm very happy
still coming too. Yeah.
What's that?
I said lots still coming too. So I think there's been a lot of complaints of things like, e-commerce item scope dimensions that are missing, content groups, various things. I have high confidence that these things will be launching, in the foreseeable future. Can't give away any timelines here on the show, but I do know that these things are coming, and we're going to see, things that people feel are still missing continually added to the product over the next months, quarters, etc. So I think, we're getting there.
Super cool. Yeah, I think, one need that I've heard a lot of, especially on the e-commerce side, is that there's Merchant Center and there's Search Console and there's analytics and there's more components of Merchant Center or shopping. Like having that all underneath one specific umbrella would be very useful for a lot of folks. We have a lot of questions coming in already, Krista, so I'm going to go ahead and start addressing them accordingly. First, kind of a comment question. So Richard asks, why even build the reports in GA4 if you can utilize Google Data Studio? So if Google Data Studio, if I'm a consultant or an SEO or internally, I'm utilizing Google Data Studio as a reporting deliverable mechanism, right? I can feed it via UA, via GSC, and whatever metrics I want to put in there. Do I even need to let people know that what's powering Google Data Studio has changed from Universal Analytics over to GA4? Or does it really make much of a difference at the end of the day? Or is maybe there's going to be more things I can add to the report?
So I think there's maybe two questions here. That one about like, do I even need to let them know it's changed? There are differences between UA and GA4. So for example, in UA, we had goals. In GA4, we have conversions, and they are not the same thing. And so the way you're reporting on things is going to be different. There's going to be different metric names, or, things that you have available in your dashboard. So if you're just, changing them, still calling a conversion a goal, but the numbers are pretty different because they're actually calculated differently between UA and GA4, you might get questions. So I would suggest, yes, letting people know that, the data sources have changed. Not everything in GA4 is available yet in the Data Studio connector. A lot of people are using the BigQuery connector for their GA4 data instead of the native GA4 connector to kind of get more of that raw data. That comes with its own, issues of having to do a lot more calculation and building yourself. I think that there are ways around that. But then the other thing is that not like I said, not everything's available. Not everything will be available in Data Studio. So for example, the entire Explore section of GA4, which is a really powerful kind of deeper analysis tool, is not going to be accessible in Data Studio. That data kind of goes through a lot more processing on the fly within the UI of GA4 when, for example, a funnel or path is being built. And that doesn't go out through the API. It's not accessible to Data Studio. So I do think that there are reasons that you would want to do both. I think Data Studio is a great tool to be able to create those dashboards, but for anybody who's a data analyst, often looking at the data, I think you're going to want to be in the UI or in BigQuery or something looking at that raw data.
That's really interesting. Okay, cool. I hope that clears things up there. So there's a lot more available within GA4, some stuff that's not implemented into Data Studio. And of course, it's not just a naming convention change, it's actually the data that's being reported as well, right? Between goals and conversions. Next question is, what about GDPR in Europe? I had a question that Ilya writes, GA4 does not seem to respect GDPR at the moment. Any thoughts there? Anything that you're seeing? Does GA4 respect GDPR?
Lots of thoughts here. Let me caveat it by your general statement of I'm not a lawyer. You should consult your in-house counsel or whoever your legal advice is coming from. Certainly not myself. But I think what I can say here is that GA4 is a heck of a lot more privacy centric than Universal Analytics is. All of the rulings coming out of the EU right now, so I'm talking about Austria, France, Italy, are specifically looking at cases based on Universal Analytics. GA4 is actually doing a lot of things natively now that Google has kind of taken it upon themselves to do in anticipation of things like GDPR and changing rulings, such as in Europe, it's no longer collecting IP address. You can turn off, or they have very specific location, country-based, or in the US, even state-based collection of different data. So Google Signals, your demographic data, various things. There's like 3 different settings that you can actually modify in the admin section of GA4 now, based on either country level or state level data collection. And so I would say, I think that it's a little bit of a wait and see with the rulings coming out of Europe. I'm hopeful we're going to get a new data transfer agreement between the US and Europe. But who knows how that will go. But I think we're in a much better position with GA4 than we were in or are in with UA in terms of the legality of it. Not to say that UA is necessarily illegal. I'm not making any statements there. But the other thing that we have going in GA4 is that it's doing things like conversion modeling and behavior modeling. So when it doesn't have data available from cookies, it's able to model out what your full data set could or should look like based on some really smart algorithms that Google is running and using. So I think they're doing what they can to kind of fill in the gap when we don't have cookies, and they're also making, I think, a pretty valiant effort to help at a very specific country level or state level to help you collect the right data in the right places.
It's really interesting on the state level, right? Because I think as a whole, most website owners by default have just gone by the California privacy laws just to cover everything in the US, or just go by GDPR to cover everything in case all the states change, but it is state by state.
I think there's something like 4 or 5 different states that have individual laws right now. Yeah. CCPA and GDPR actually are fairly different in that GDPR is opt-in, CCPA is opt-out. So there's definitely some differences. So it's nice to have that granular level of ability to select. That's interesting.
That's really interesting. One question that came through as well is Boris asked, do the different changes that are happening in GA Universal Analytics and GA4 apply to the transition from GA360 to GA4360, or are there any differences?
So just like the transition from UA to GA4, GA360 customers on Universal Analytics do need to transition to GA4360. I think they're just trying to call it the new GA360 rather than GA4360. Seems kind of confusing to me, so we'll call it GA4360 for now. GA4360 customers, or anybody who was a UA360 customer transitioning to GA4360, do have a slightly extended deadline for the deprecation date. It's only 3 months later, so it's October 1st, 2023, rather than July 1st, 2023. So October 1st, 2023, you'll stop collecting data into UA. But besides that, you do still have to transition. GA4360 has its own, kind of limits and differences between, the standard version and the 360 version. So, talk to your reseller or Google, depending on who you have your contracts there with, to determine if GA4360 still makes sense for you, or if you are thinking about upgrading to 360, it might be a good time, because the intro prices are actually a lot lower, and the benefits are different. So yeah.
Yeah, even that additional 3 months alone, right, is almost worth it. Is that just because it takes enterprise so long to get anything done?
Yeah, so from the deprecation date announcement of March 16th, most customers would have had 15 months to transition. Enterprise clients were given essentially 18 months, right? I think 18 months is still a pretty short timeline to transition an entire enterprise. I really hope that most large companies, had been paying attention over the previous 2 years of Google saying, like, this is our new product, this is where everything is going. And started to get some of the stepping stones in place, because I know consultants like myself and many others are very full right now with migration work, in terms of clients coming to us and needing help moving over as soon as possible.
It's nice to have timelines. Hopefully they stick to it. I mean, Google does have a history of giving a deadline and then moving it after, like was just done
They
on
do.
from the side. So,
Yes,
but
they
it's
do.
good to be safe at the same time, because it's going to happen.
I do not think that this deadline is going to change.
Yeah, it's pretty.
So I would suggest taking this one seriously. I've seen a lot of people comment on, Twitter and social media, like, oh, the state's going to move, like, it's no big deal, we don't need to, do this migration yet. I would take this seriously. You can read between the lines. You can read between the lines there with what I'm trying to say. I know people, but I would start moving.
And if you don't, if you don't start moving now, you're probably not going to be able to pull year-over-year data within GA4.
Well, you're definitely not going to be able to pull year-over-year data in GA4 anymore, since UA will stop processing data on July 1st. So if you didn't have GA4 set up by July 1st of this year, you won't have a full year of data in GA4. That being said, you'll still have your UA data up through next year, so you can kind of do GA4 data for the future and UA for the past. But the sooner that you get it implemented, the more historical data you will have in GA4 to be able to compare to.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people on about GA4, and the one recommendation they made was just set it up and get the tag in now, right? Just get the tag on the site. You can change it over time. You can customize it over time. You can get the reporting done over time. Google will change it over time, but as long as you have the tag set up, it's going to be pulling that data accordingly for you. So just get the tag set up and then learn. You have a year to learn, so just get the tag set up and do it from there. So there's going to be a limitation on the ability to pull year-over-year data in GA4 beginning next year in July, if no one's done it yet. What about historical data limitations that are currently within UA, and maybe like sample data, or sometimes you're comparing year over year and then you just see the numbers change accordingly? Maybe that's just a savings component, an efficiency component within GA's cloud. But are we going to expect that moving forward with GA4 as well?
Yeah, so GA4 is actually built very differently than Universal Analytics. Everything that you see in the reporting UI, so basically all of the pre-canned reports or anything that you can build and customize outside of the Explore section, so in the regular reports section, is pre-aggregated tables of data. And that means that that data is unsampled. So you will not encounter sampling in that data. Anything in the Explore section is actually being pulled. It's the same base data, but it's not pre-aggregated. It lives in a different table because you can access it ad hoc. So because you can pull that data ad hoc, that table of data is subject to sampling. And the limitations there are, I want to say it's 10 million events within the time period for standard customers, up to 1 billion events in the time period for 360 customers. If you are a large enterprise with a lot of traffic, for example, I have a very large financial institution clients, and they can get a week of data that has less than 1 billion hits. Anything more than that, and they are also subject to sampling and Explore. It does have an unsampled option for 360 clients, so you can kind of download that unsampled report. I expect they're going to continue to raise those limits for 360 clients. I don't expect those limits to change much for standard clients, but the only place that you'll see sampling is in Explore. So the good news is anything coming from this pre-aggregated tables is completely unsampled in GA4, unlike the main reporting UI in Universal Analytics, where you often are encountering sampling.
Do you foresee any ability to better define what direct traffic is in GA4, especially with Apple building their workarounds like Siri Suggest and things like that? Like there just seems there's been such a change year over year with traffic, especially Safari oriented traffic being funneled into direct, right? So do you foresee any changes on that end?
No. Google can only know so much, right? If Safari is not giving us any information about where that traffic is coming from, then Google essentially has to classify it as direct. So yeah, it is what it is. I think there's a small portion of it that usually is user error or something we can control, like remember to tag your emails appropriately and things like that. But there's definitely a chunk of direct that we can't impact as analysts.
So we've talked a lot about SEO or general marketing, but what changes are there from UA over to GA4 that specifically affects PPC, paid search or Google ad campaigns?
Yeah, good question. So I mentioned early on the new UTMs. One of them is Source Platform. That is a UTM in particular that is meant to basically tell you what ads platform within the Google ecosystem the ad was run on. So for example, you can run Google Ads traffic through Search Ads 360, but not all traffic run through Search Ads 360 is Google Ads traffic, right? And so that UTM would tell you if it's coming from Search Ads or if it's coming from Google Ads or what. So a little bit more clarity there as to the platform that you're running your paid traffic on. I think another big change that is more noticeable in the UI is the default acquisition reports. The primary dimension of those reports, and you can change this, but the primary dimension when you log into those reports is the default channel grouping. And the default channel grouping has changed from UA to GA4. So I'd highly suggest just Googling like GA4 default channel grouping. You'll find the Help Center article that lists all of what goes into the default channel grouping in GA4 now. Essentially, they've significantly expanded default channel groupings. They've added several more granular channels. So for example, they're now breaking out things like organic social versus paid social. There's a few more like paid breakouts there to give you a little bit more granular detail. Those channels won't look apples to apples with UA. So definitely check that out. Pay attention to that, because I think that's a pretty big change to how people initially look at that data in GA4. One other thing that I did want to mention here, and this is specifically for linking. So when you're linking, especially to something like Google Ads, you will need to rebuild your audiences, right, in GA4 that you may have been targeting from UA. When you rebuild those audiences with GA4 data and you make them accessible to Google Ads, you will want to wait a certain period of time because you need those audiences to populate. They're brand new, right? So people have to come to the site and qualify for the audience and now fill out that audience. Whereas your old UA audiences have, been populating for a long time already. So I wouldn't create a brand new audience in GA4 and immediately change that in Google Ads to target your new audience, because there won't really be anybody in that audience to target. So the recommendation is, if you have, a decent amount of traffic, wait at least 15 days. If you don't have a lot of traffic, wait, a few weeks, 3-4 weeks to populate those audiences with enough traffic that they will be meaningful to your data. And then the other thing is bidding to conversions. So you will need to switch from your UA goals to a GA4 conversion to bid to. Keep in mind, goals and conversions are not the same thing. They're not exactly apples to apples. So when you do make those changes, you'll probably just want to pay a little bit extra attention to what you're actually spending your ad dollars on, right? And make sure that you're targeting the right things, or the outcomes are looking like what you would expect. And if not, you might want to tweak what you're doing there.
Could you, would you mind going a little bit further into the difference between goals and conversions? You mentioned it a couple of times. What exactly are the differences going to be?
Yep. So in UA, goals only fire once per session. So even if, let's say you had a goal in your site that somebody filled out a form, if somebody comes to your site and fills out 3 forms, it's only going to count as 1 goal conversion. If they did the same thing in GA4, like with GA4 tracking, every single form that would be filled out would count as a goal conversion, as a conversion. And a conversion in GA4 is literally just an event. So the event fired for the form complete, and then in the UI you toggle that event to be a conversion. So there's no real additional setup like you had for goals, which is nice. It's just like a little toggle saying this event is a conversion. But that also means that we don't have the granularity that we had in UA of things like time or page depth type goals without a lot of additional setup. Like you can set up those kind of things in Google Tag Manager to then trigger an event after a certain amount of time or after a certain amount of page views, and then use that event as a conversion. You have to get a little bit more creative there. The main kind of goal to conversion easily transferable things are things like destination goals or specific event goals, right? Those will be more easy to set up as conversions as long as you have an event that is that destination or is that click.
Very interesting. So there's a chance that if someone does rage click my forms on my site, I'm going to get a lot more conversions being tracked than currently. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Interesting. Yet at the same time, that can be useful, right? So if someone's going to the site and they're contacting via a lead, and that's put into the lead bucket with a client, and then they're contacting via the contact form for customer service, that can be a totally different conversion. It's great to have someone in the customer service queue. From a retention standpoint, it's great to have them as a lead. They might do both over the course of a month, right? Speaking of which, we did have a question come through about view through conversion windows. Well, the view through conversion windows, will there be a way to see them in GA4 and control that accordingly? Is that set up yet?
I do think that is live for YouTube EVCs. I don't think that you can change the time period of that view through in terms of how long that conversion lasts for. I don't know off the top of my head what those time periods are. I can't recall that. But I don't believe that is editable in GA4 currently.
Okay. Currently, we still have,
who knows about the future,
almost a year. Yeah. And just as a reminder for anyone that's asking about bounce rate, so bounce rate is going to be available via GA4, but it's going to be the inverse of engagement rate, correct?
Yep, correct.
Okay,
Is available. It's there now, but it is not the same.
Not the same as you used to right now. Also, another question that came in via Maud is that is there any reason why the data retention period is only 2 months by default in GA4?
Yeah, so for standard clients, you can change that to 14 months in the admin settings. For 360 clients, you can change it. I want to say it's up to 50 months. In the admin settings, they default it to 2 months because who knows what your company's data retention policy is going to be. Some companies have more aggressive policies than others. This is another kind of talk to your legal team and decide what's right for you situation. But I think Google defaults it to 2 months to be, as conservative as possible there. They don't want to hold on to your data any longer than they need to. If you need it longer, you can tell them.
So I'm going to throw you a softball here. If someone is looking to learn more about GA4, there's a lot of information out there. We've done a lot of information. We've done a lot of articles. Kelly Larkin at SEJ has done a great job of getting tutorials, articles out there, things like that people are following, videos and stuff. But what are any recommendations that you would have for someone that wants to get started with learning more and taking maybe the next 11 months to master GA4 or less?
Yeah. Great question. I would say, I feel like, most of your questions have been softballs. Just kidding. But no, I think there are a ton of resources online. If you Google GA4, you're going to find a lot out there. I think Twitter is a great resource. A lot of people are doing threads on it. I know I myself do a lot of threads on GA4, and I try to teach different concepts every week. I'm at Krista Seiden on Twitter. I also blog a lot about GA4, as do many other people, but you can find a lot of my content on kristaseiden.com. And then, specifically on the learning side, if you're interested in courses, there are several courses out there. But I also teach courses on GA4, and you can find information on those courses at academy.ksdigital.co. And I have courses about, learning the reporting and analysis UIs, learning about advanced features, learning about technical setup of GA4. So I kind of cover the gamut of topics there around GA4. But yeah, I think, there's a ton out there. If you're not on Measure Slack, it's a Slack channel dedicated to, the analytics industry. There's, I want to say like 15 or 20,000 people in there. Really? It is a huge, amazing resource. You can go and ask a question and, 15 people will try to answer it for you. So another really great free resource out there to help with, democratizing analytics education.
Is that set up on a subdomain and easy to find something?
Yeah. So if you go to join.measure.chat, that's a form where you basically, submit the form to be invited to the Slack channel, since you have to be invited to the Slack channel. And usually within a couple of days, the admin will let you in, and then you can go wild in there.
Not too wild.
not too wild.
The analytics.
No SEO is done wild stuff. 15 or 20,000. Let me see. Let's see here. I'm looking at it right now.
I just said not
too
wild.
I think it's close to 20,000.
I know how all you SEOs are. You're gonna be like, oh, this is my site link. I'm having a problem with the GA, especially on this page link. So don't get kicked out when you join.
They will kick you out if you're spamming.
Yes. Excellent. So we have GA4 timeline. We have the core differences, the additions, opportunities. So you're saying that people definitely should not be hesitant about making this change. Like there's really no choice, right?
There's really no choice. I guess the choice is you go use a different platform. And I saw a poll by Aleda like early on after the deprecation announcement, asking SEOs if they were going to stick with GA4 or use something else. And it was a ridiculous amount of like 30% saying they were going to another platform. And I'm calling bullshit. I don't agree. I don't believe that for a second, right? Like you're in the Google ecosystem. You need those integrations with Google Ads or whatever. Or your stakeholders are just used to saying like, hey, what are my Google Analytics numbers? Like, you're not going to go move to Matomo or Piwik or something that they're never going to remember what it's called. So I think for the most part,
people are pushing a prospect. Like, oh, our agency does not use Google Analytics. We've decided that it was too user unfriendly for us. So we're going to something much more simpler.
I have seen several SEOs who have, been very vehemently against GA4, and why? Like, is that really the hill you want to die on? Like, your clients expect this, so maybe get on board. But yeah, if you anticipate staying in the Google ecosystem, you don't have that many other options. Sure, you can go try something else. I think 9 out of 10 people who do that will come back to GA, because it's so dominant. For better or for worse, it is the dominant platform out there, right?
And it's free.
And GA, it's free. Like, people really undervalue the free platform that is available to
I
them, right?
agree. I
Like,
remember.
there's a lot of complaints over a free platform. Um,
I remember when like, yeah, I've been around a while too. So I remember when Google acquired Urchin to make Google Analytics, and everyone's like,
mhm.
I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to give Google all of my information. I'm going to get something else instead. Oh, but it's free. Yeah, it is free. Yeah, it's free. So now
It's
it's
free,
funny
and
from the default. Yeah.
it's not like, yes, GA4 is a brand new property type, a brand new data model, but it's not like Google started from scratch with this tool, right? They have 2 decades of understanding of how building analytics tools and the types of data and the scale that they have to use for this. So most of these other tools are not nearly as mature. You may go try them out, and you'll see that they lack a lot of the things that you would like too. So yeah,
Do
GA4
you
does
recommend?
certain things, but
Do you recommend though that people do have some kind of a fallback? Like, I know, like by default, my fallback is Google Search Console, right? Which is also, but it's different data, right? Because it's back end
mhm.
versus front end. But do you feel that there should be a fallback to be able to compare numbers to in case there is maybe a hiccup on the reporting side
Yeah,
or something like that?
I'm conflicted about this. I really, really hate when I go into organizations and they tell me they have 3 analytics tools, and this team uses this one for this, and this other team uses the other one for this, and none of these platforms talk to each other, and people are reporting on different numbers. I think it just opens you up to a lot more data problems than there are benefits. That being said, I think while I am very hopeful that we will come out the other side of a lot of the GDPR rulings with a GA4 that is still usable in Europe, if you are Europe based, I think a lot of people are considering what other alternatives there might be. But like I said, I am relatively hopeful that we're gonna have resolution there that will allow companies to continue using GA4. But I mean, I think it's really up to you. I personally don't love multiple tools because I think it can be really confusing to internal users, stakeholders, and if they're implemented even somewhat differently, or because the tools just inherently are different, you're going to get different data, and that's going to be really confusing.
I agree. I agree. It's always good to have some kind of fallback, but you don't want to mix up your reporting too much. It's bad enough from an outreach perspective, changing from DA to D, like all of the different forms of like link authority reporting from third party tools. Like when I go in, I try to be like, hey, this is your average DR from your PR campaigns that you've like. What's DR? I thought we were doing DA. Like, well, we gotta look at various forms of metrics. But it is hard to change that, right? To steer that ship. Especially to your point, you don't necessarily want to be outside of the Google ecosystem if you are a business. If you're trying to stay off the grid, maybe, but not, which is counterproductive to most business activities. So we've talked about SEO hesitations with GA4, transitioning, differences between the two, differences between the goals versus conversions, differences and benefits from an advertising perspective, and then also the hey, be patient because Google is adding to this as GA4 matures, right? The GA4 that's going to be around or that everyone's going to be making that switch to on July 1st, 2023 is probably going to be very different different in terms of more robust than the GA4 that's available right
Yeah.
now. Before we sign off, are there any other, I guess, types of reporting benefits, even to a degree, surprises that someone should look out for when they're making that when they're setting up their GA4, when they're planning that migration or that transition over to GA4 as well?
Yeah, I would say don't expect your data to be exactly the same between UA and GA4. So even things like sessions and user counts will be different because GA4 calculates these things in different ways than Universal Analytics. Page views, probably relatively similar. There's like a few metrics. Google's got a great help center article that helps break down like which metrics may be closer or further apart between your implementations. So check that out. But page views should be close. Transactions should probably be pretty close, but like there will be differences. So don't be alarmed if all of a sudden you have more or less sessions in GA4 than you had in UA. I would just say focus on implementing GA4 in the best possible way with a robust and useful event and parameter taxonomy, and that will help set you up in the best way for the future. And to add to that, I would say most people's universal analytics implementations are actually pretty awful. So I wouldn't necessarily try to get parity with what your UA numbers were because they were probably wrong to begin with. So that may be another reason that you see differences there.
I have seen where people have made that change, and there's much, for example, in one instance, there's much less revenue attributed to specific channels in GA4 than there was in UA. And I think a lot of that was because UA originally was set up incorrectly. And now they've had the chance to fix it. And there has to be a course correct, which is put into play if that happens, right? It's like, oh no, we can't go back to the old wrong reporting. We have to report accordingly. We do have a question that just came in from Monica. Can you see average events per session to help people to see the numbers of conversions that would be realistically tied to individual users? So if a user is converting more than once, is there a way that we can pull something like an average events per session to give us an idea?
Yeah, there's an average events per session metric, I believe, in GA4. In most of the table reports, or definitely in the events table report. So I think that should be in there already for you to check out. And then in that table report, you should be able to filter down by specific events or by specific conversions to see that as well.
Very cool. Very cool. That's great to know. Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure going over GA4 with you. We've dropped your Twitter handle, your LinkedIn, the link over for your GA4 courses, which I see you have a bundle of them available, the Deep Dive GA4 bundle, at academy.ksdigital.co. So Krista's site is ksdigital.co. If you're interested in her courses on GA4, just go to academy.ksdigital.co. It's all there for you. Krista Seiden, as in Poseidon, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Anything that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Thanks so much for having me. I know many of you who have listened to this podcast are probably still pretty skeptical about GA4. I'm here to help. Reach out on Twitter, etc. I think that this is a journey, and we're all on it together, and we will get there. So I think there are better data days ahead.
Amazing. So we're going to have the wrap up for this next week. If you're listening right now, you can probably just go to Search Engine Journal, search for GA4, or search for Krista GA4. You'll find the write up on today's show there. Also, what might be interesting is to have you back maybe next year, Krista, before we get closer to that July deadline, to talk about the changes and the maturing and the growth of GA4 that's happened between now and then. And then that way we can get you on to talk to folks that are kind of waiting to the last minute to make this happen.
Do not wait till June 30th of 2023, people.
Everyone's going to be, I can't wait to see the Google.
I'm going to get so many calls on July 1st, 2023. Why isn't my analytics collecting any more data?
Yeah, you're going to have to book a vacation. It's like accountants all go on vacation after April 15th. It's going to be time to go. But yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people waiting to the last minute. Do not wait till the last minute. Like we said, if anything, just go ahead and drop that tag on your site now. There's probably gonna be a lot of changes between now and then. So we'll talk again in about 10 months or so. Krista, sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks again for joining today. Thanks everyone for listening. And to those of you that have been viewing live, thank you again. We do the SEJ Show every week, streaming live to LinkedIn, YouTube, subscribe, ring the bell, Twitter, and Facebook. So we do these videos. You can ask and comment, and the comments available within those platforms, we see them, and then we put them into the audio podcast. So thanks again for everyone who chimed in today and tuned in today. And thanks again, Krista. I really appreciate it. Bye, everybody. It's been a great show. Thanks again.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Search Engine Journal Show. If you liked this episode, subscribe to our channel for so much more and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing.